I really like finding the gaps, finding the people who aren't written about. And so I know from reading that there were many, many great romances between mistresses and men. It just kind of intrigued me to write a story that is that kind of love story. In my second big book, A Most Improper Duchess, the heroine in that, she's a ballerina at the Palais Garnier in Paris. And so it was part of an expectation of being in the Ballet du Corps that they would be available for liaisons with the patrons afterwards. And it's like those types of people in the background come up a lot in historical romance, but they never quite get the limelight.
Welcome to Raising Baby Authors. I'm Cassia, your host and a brand new writer. If you feel overwhelmed and lost about this whole writing thing, you're certainly not alone. Join me while I pester my author guests for writing advice and find out how they do it. Because if they could, then why not you? It truly takes a village to raise an author, so let me share my village with you. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to the classroom. Thank you so much for giving me your time and attention. And let's meet our new mentor today. It's Alivia Fleur. Hi, Alivia. How are you?
Hello. I'm well. I'm so excited to be here this evening, my time.
Oh yeah, it's the morning for me since you're in Australia. I am super happy that you could join me today. And would you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yes, so I would like to start by acknowledging that I am coming to you all from Wiradjuri country, and I would like to acknowledge that the Wiradjuri people are the traditional custodians of the land where I live, work and write. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and extend that respect to any First Nations people listening to this podcast today. So I am Alivia. I write in Australia. I live in Australia. And my stories are Victorian era historical romance, a mix of heat, and they're stories with lots of humour, lots of heart. And I have been called the master of the non-traditional happy ending, which is not something I did deliberately, but it is something that seems to stick when it comes to my work. So the non-traditional happy after is something I love too.
All right. Well, that sounds fascinating. I think before we start discussing anything, we had a little pre-discussion in emails and before the recording, and we both think it would be good to make a little content warning for anyone who's listening. There's going to be a discussion of chronic illness and cancer. So if anybody feels uncomfortable with that, please take care of yourself. Feel free to tune out and join the next episode. That said, let's start. First of all, just as a warm up, I do have a question from one of my followers and one of your loyal readers. If you know her, her name is Helen and handles Bookish Helen. Yes, I'm pretty sure you know her.
Hi, Helen.
So Helen had a question since we started with your introduction and you mentioned that you live in Australia. She's wondering if you have any plans to set one of your books in Australia. And she also said she loves your books very much.
Thank you, Helen. I love you too. I haven't thought of setting a book in Australia. I work as a historian in a museum, so my day-to-day is very much about Australian history. So writing other worlds is my way of working with and engaging with a different type of history that I can't do in my working life. So I love bringing Australian characters into my stories. I've written one Australian character and I plan to write another one next year. But I like to take them out of Australia and put them in the world because we do travel the world. So I don't have any plans for an Australian set story at the moment, but I will be bringing in more Australian characters.
That sounds like fun. All right, well, let's talk, since you already started talking about your background and where you work and everything, let's talk about how you started writing and why you started writing.
It's I started writing a few years ago in 2019, which was the year that I turned 40. And I had just finished, I do a lot of study. I had just finished my fourth degree, and I I'm not very good at sitting still at night. I'm not very good at just sitting down and watching TV and that type of life. I have a brain that is constantly going, and so I started writing in that year because writing a book was something I had always wanted to do when I was a child, and I used to write fiction constantly as a child. But once I started working, obviously I wrote nonfiction, and it's a different type of creativity, and it was sort of a thing I just wanted to do. I wanted to see if I could. And that book has still not, it's finished, but it's not doing anything. But I kept writing, and I wrote short stories. I did mentorships. I joined different communities, and so that was how I started writing. So when I started writing historical romance, though, that was more because I had written these stories that had a couple of open door scenes, and I was trying to get feedback from different reader groups that I was in about whether the scenes were any good. And I think it's a bit of that nervousness. Some people said, you shouldn't put that in, like, don't bother putting that in a book. Nobody wants that. I think, well, I want that. Some people must want that. And
Oh my God.
I couldn't get really good feedback on whether what I was writing was any good or not. So I thought, do you know what? If I write a short story and I put it on Amazon, I will get feedback very quickly about whether I have written something good or not, and it will be very honest. And so that's what I did. I wrote Trist, and I put it up, and that was sort of how I started writing historical romance. It was completely unplanned and still has no plan. I really enjoyed that experience, and I really loved writing short fiction. And so then I had more ideas, because once you start creating, it does kind of feed more ideas. And so then I continued writing those short stories.
Wow. So the first short stories that you were writing, they were not romances, they were something else.
I was writing, so they're not published online. Some of them are in local anthologies, but I did start writing more historical fiction and literary fiction. So I started from a very different place, but I love genre, and I have always loved reading genre. And that was what I wanted to write. I wanted to write something that was different from the structure of that other work. And so that's why I gravitated towards that more. And I love romance. I love happy endings.
Exactly. And telling someone that nobody wants that is very presumptuous. There are like millions of people
I
who
know.
want
I
only that
know.
sometimes. Yeah, wow. You did say that you started with historical fiction and literary fiction. Did your background, your education help you start in literary fiction? Because for me, I really love the beautiful prose and reading it, but imagining, like, I don't have any English related education, imagining starting writing it seems impossible to me. And you kind of started with literary fiction.
Yeah, there are more stories. It was the nature of what was available to me in terms of places where I could have a short story published, which is in a local anthology, and also a mentorship opportunity that I had working with someone who was a literary fiction writer. And so that kind of dictated what the type of things that we produced during that. So it's not all that different. It's really more about the subject matter and the weight, and the that you might have a twists and things which aren't particularly positive. Like, none of those stories that I wrote then have happy endings. They have those sort of endings that kind of make you feel a little bit. But in terms of how I write, like how I put words in order and those types of things, that isn't any different at all. So I write the same type of style across what I was doing then and what I do now. It's really about the pacing and the characters that has changed, and the ending, of course.
All right. Well, it's just very interesting to me because I've been reading your books and I was just like, what, this person probably had studied creative writing a lot, maybe has a degree or two or three in that. And then like, yeah,
Not
because
not in
it's just
creative writing, no.
all right. But something English related, right?
I have a history degree. I have a couple of history degrees.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just that history degree helps you with research, right? Like you know what
Mm.
you're writing about, you know what you're talking about, and it's very clear when you're reading that you do know what you're talking about. But just the language, I really enjoy the way you express the emotions and basically everything. Like I'm going to ask you about like the technicalities of that later, but just let's continue on your journey. So you did say that you found a mentor and that you were finding places to publish. So you always had a goal, like I want to write and I want to publish, so I'm going to find these places where I can fit.
It was more just what was available and what was interesting to me at the time. So it was like I have made plenty of submissions that haven't been published, and they were just the ones that were. So there's a lot of rejection amongst the acceptance, and it was really just about playing. It was about getting an idea and where might I find an audience for this idea and who might engage, and also challenging myself to grow as what was interesting to me to research, because that was the main reason that I started writing, was to research these different channels, but also what might where might I find readers for this? Because there is something about you can write and write and write and go to your writers group and share those things and publish them for your family, and there's absolutely nothing like that's brilliant. I wanted a bit more than that. I wanted to find a wider readership. I wanted to challenge myself in terms of finding a readership. So that's what I do, and it hasn't ever been a big plan. I don't have any type of plan about what I am doing. So anyone out there who feels like you need a plan, I don't. I mean, I don't have one. I don't know if that's a drawback or not, but it is what I do, and it does make me immensely happy to do what I'm doing in that way.
And that matters, right? Like if that's what you need and you don't need more, there's no need to make it a big business or like treat it as a your only full-time career. If that's what makes you happy and you said you did want it to find readers, so that is the point, right?
Yes,
You didn't
yes,
just want to write, but you also want people to read it, and you went about it in a way that you found places to submit and you found yourself a mentor. And so it's I talk to some authors and I think not everybody notices that it's sometimes not that easy for people to even know where to find these opportunities. Like I see a lot of people on threads, a lot of authors saying that they wrote a book, they published it, and like nobody's reading it and they hate marketing and like they don't know how to find the readers. But I see some authors that are just naturally kind of, oh, I see this opportunity, I'm gonna go submit there, I'm gonna go apply to that. And it's just about not being afraid to just do that. Like, yeah, you're going to be rejected 20 times, but maybe one time you're going to be accepted and it's going to be fine.
yep. And also, something that is rejected somewhere doesn't mean it won't be accepted somewhere else. So it's always important, if you feel like you've written something good, to believe in it and Maybe there were other stories that hit the mark for that publication that day, but that doesn't mean your story won't hit the mark further on.
Yeah, exactly. And since we started already talking about submitting and rejections and acceptances, you did apply for or how is it called, submit to an award, or how is this process happening, and how did you find this award?
So that's through the Romance Writers of Australia. So it's called the Ruby, and they have a whole suite of awards depending on where you are in your publishing journey. I found them an extraordinarily helpful organisation for me at this stage, and very supportive, but also very positive towards independent publishing. I've submitted to other awards, and like it's okay that I'm not picked, but no independent authors are picked for shortlisting or long listing or anything. And so the Ruby is one that it really doesn't matter where you've come from in your publishing journey. There have been authors who've had two books shortlisted, one an independent and one a traditionally published book. And Annie Seaton and her indie published book won. I had a writer friend who always would say, apply for everything. Apply, even if you don't think you've got it, if you don't think you're ready, apply for everything. And so when I came across Romance Writers of Australia and the Ruby, and I had this one story that was eligible to be submitted by 500 words because it's only just over the limit of what is the minimum for novella category, which is 10,000 words. And I put it in just to see what would happen. And it was shortlisted, and then it won. I entered last year and didn't even get shortlisted. That's sort of the way that the award goes, is that it very much is, it's an amazing thing just to be shortlisted for it. And so it was just mind-blowing that Portrait won. So
Yeah, I have that one. I haven't read it yet, but I'm super excited because I think I even before I got it, I heard somewhere on Instagram about it. Like it was when it was released, probably it was going around, and I was like, "Oh, that looks interesting."
it did absolutely nothing on release, and this is why it's such an interesting story, because I didn't know it was the second story I released. So I was in Kindle Unlimited when I released my first few short stories, and so I had released Trist, and then I had this idea for a story. I wanted to challenge myself. So the challenge of Portrait was to write a really pathetic male character. And so Clark he's a really nice guy, but he's got no job. All his furniture's been repossessed. He's heartbroken. He's got all these bills because his fiancée skipped town, and he's about to have his knees broken if he doesn't come up with the money to pay them. And he gets this one last glimmer of hope, which is to do a portrait sitting for this woman. And then at the end, he has to sell his camera. Like he is that broke. And so I thought, can I write a love story for someone like that? And so that's their story. And it was, I've forgotten the question, but it was that was sort of the so when I released that, because it was the second one, I just released it. I don't think I even did an Instagram post for the 3 followers I would have had at the time. And the first review it got was 1 star, no text. And I was a little bit sad because I thought I had written this story that was quite different and interesting, and I loved it. I loved writing it, and I still look back on it and remember how much fun I had writing this story and going into these deep dives, watching YouTube videos on the photography technique is daguerreotype photography, which is quite particular, involves a lot of stages and chemical processes to make the photo fixed. And I had to stage how this process fit between the intimate scenes, because it is an erotic story. It is still a romance, but it is primarily erotica. And then it sort of released to crickets, and then I made it free for a few days. I thought, well, nothing to lose. I'll make it free. And then the beautiful Rebecca Campbell, hi Rebecca, who is an Australian erotica author, read it, and she referred to it as thinking women's erotica, and that was just mind blowing for me. It was the most extraordinary piece of support and encouragement at the time, and it was just the perfect words to hear, because it wasn't something that I had intended to do, but it did sum up what that story was. It was lots of different things, and it's still not a particularly highly rated story on Goodreads. It's my lowest. It sells very steadily. It doesn't look particularly fancy in the shop, um, and it won me an extraordinary award. And the people who love it really love it. People will email you when you start publishing. You think no one will ever do this, but people do. And the stories that I get the most emails about, where people want to share what they're feeling, is firstly the portrait sitting, and then after that, mistress.
Yeah.
And so it is sort of one of those stories that on one angle it looks extraordinarily successful, on other angles it looks like a failure, and and that is the nature of writing. So when it did start doing the rounds on Instagram, I think it had been out for about a year, and so that was, and
Ah.
then it kind of popped up for a little bit with a few people writing about it, and I was completely shocked, because it was nothing I had done. It just kind of hit a couple of people. I think some readers might have gotten it in Zoe Barb. I put it in Zoe Barb, and then it just kind of touched a few people in a positive way. So you can never assume that the game is up, because it's a constant surprise, that story. It's the exception to everything.
Wow, now I'm
My
even more
dandy.
curious to read it, actually. I'm super
Yeah.
excited.
I mean, you
Yeah,
might hate it.
okay.
Some people really hate it. So
Well, you will never
you might,
know, but yeah,
you
I
never
mean,
know.
I would never promise anyone that I would love
Yep.
what I'm reading, but like, yeah, when I do love, then I'll let them know. Just in technical terms, so you first published it on
Hmm.
Kindle Unlimited or whatever,
Yep.
and then you applied for an award, or you can only apply with things that are not published yet?
No, that award, it has to be published. So the Ruby is only for published awards. So they have other awards for unpublished or emerging writers, but that one is a published works one. So, and in the year, for the year that it was published,
Ah,
it's
okay.
quite strict. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just very interesting to me because I know very little about these awards kind of things, and I have also listened to a class in one of the seminars that was saying that you can actually just like do a lot by just applying to so many different awards, and then, I mean, it is a good boost for confidence. It is like some exposure, and it is like award-winning author on the cover of your
Yeah.
book, which
Yeah.
always looks good.
It does depend on the award, though. There are, like anything in writing, there are predatory publishers, there are predatory awards where you pay a fee. Like most awards will carry an administration fee, but sometimes the fee is very high, or there are expectations around what happens with the story afterwards. So you do have to be very careful. So Writer Beware is a blog and a Facebook group, and also the Alliance of Independent Authors also runs a list of reputable awards to look out for. We're so vulnerable as creatives because we have so much passion and energy, and there are people who will look to exploit that from us. So definitely, when it comes to awards, yes, apply, put yourself out there, get used to rejection, but also get used to perhaps the surprise of being longlisted or shortlisted or winning. But also use your brain and find those networks, because there are people who are looking out for you and who have your back. So definitely do your homework as well.
Yeah, I agree. Regarding that, I've never had an Australian author on a podcast before. And so, can you just like, I don't know if anybody from Australia is listening, but the Romance Authors of Australia organization, how did you find it? And who can join? Like, what if you're not published? What if you're just like writing for fun? Can you still join?
Yes, it's for anyone. It's for anyone at any stage of their career. You don't have to be published. You just have to write romance. When I went to the conference a couple of years ago, there were lots of people who were just interested, wanted to learn, wanted to engage. So it's an incredibly welcoming organisation. Most author organisations in Australia, at least, are open to anyone who is just writing. So, Writing New South Wales or the Australian Society of Authors. There'll be tiered memberships, so it's usually cheaper if you are aspiring or emerging, but there's a lot of really nice communities depending on what sort of work you want to write. So I've found Romance Writers of Australia to be incredibly helpful because it is genre and a lot about finding markets for publication, and whereas some of the others are a bit more literary or a bit more about traditional publishing. So you kind of look around and find a nice fit.
All right. Yeah, I think it's a very useful thing. It helps you to find a community, at least. I don't know of anything like that existing in Belgium, as far as I know, but I think the closest to me would be the UK one, probably.
Okay.
And I am planning to maybe join it sometime soon because I think, yeah, it at least gives you lots of opportunities. Even if you don't take them, you're going to be aware of like what's going on and what can be done. Yeah.
And you only have to join for a year. If it's not quite right, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is maybe not that many romance writers here, like in Belgium or
Mm.
around, or maybe they're all hiding and I don't know anybody. But yeah, it would be nice to actually start such a thing in Belgium. But yeah. Anyway, I think let's talk about your happily ever afters since we've already mentioned them. So, I mean, we know that for romance, happily ever after can be, and like for general romance, it can be a lot of things, right? They can end up together as a couple, they can end up married or not married or whatever. But in historical romance, it's a little more strict than that, right? Like they kind of have to be married. As far as I know, like the general rule, they have to stay married. So, what is different about your happily ever afters?
They don't always get married.
You're whispering it as if someone's gonna find you out.
A little bit cheeky. So usually, I think because so much of historical romance is about the dukes and the nobility, and so marriage comes with certain protections and status and a certain life in terms of that happily ever after being a marriage, a wedding, and children. And in my stories, that doesn't always happen. And I think that might be because they are not always from the aristocracy. And often I have characters who don't particularly aspire to be part of that world, particularly my female characters. My female main characters quite often have jobs and
Oh,
aspirations outside
I,
of being married. So, like, I know you've read in My Fake Mistress, and so Blythe doesn't want to get married. She doesn't want children. She actually really just loves her work and wants to work. So, the idea that becoming a baroness would make her happy just didn't sit right with me. And so her ending is different. Their ending is very, very different from that sort of more traditional type of ending. But she's incredibly happy and she's very loved. And that was sort of what I really loved for her story, is that she gets to be both those things. She gets to be her career in a slightly different way than perhaps she wanted, but she still gets to work as an art conservator, and she still gets to have the love of this man that she's found. And I really like writing those types of endings.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you probably wanted to keep it more like closer to what would have happened in real life, right? Because
Yeah.
I think maybe any other historical romance author would probably twist it into what, like, they do get married, but somehow she still gets to work, tie it into a, like, yeah, there is a marriage, but also
Yeah.
there are also all those other freedoms that they both have. And yeah, so I guess it depends on how honest you want to be, and how yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes pure fantasy is great. Sometimes you read the ending and like, well, no, but that wouldn't be possible.
it's also, I really like finding the gaps, like finding the people who aren't written about, and in all the type of history work that I do. So I like finding those little pockets. And so I know from reading that there were many, many great romances between mistresses and men. And so it just kind of intrigued me to write a story that is that kind of love story. And there are, so in my second big book, which is A Most Improper Duchess. So that's a story. The heroine in that works. She's a ballerina at the Palais Garnier in Paris, and so it was part of an expectation of being in the Ballet du Corps that they would be available for liaisons with the patrons afterwards. And those types of stories, like those types of people in the background, come up a lot in historical writing and in historical romance, but they never quite get the limelight. And so I just kind of find it interesting to play with that. It's not a criticism of anything else. It's just something where I sort of think, well, what does a love story look like for a ballerina, or what does it look like for someone who doesn't want to get married, and writing that love story. And I find it challenging, and I also find it a lot of fun. Like, I really do have a lot of fun with those scenarios. And when I start writing, I usually know very, very early what the ending is going to be. So obviously I know they're going to end up together. That's a given. But I also know, so when I was writing Mistress, I was not very far in when I thought, I'm going to do this. This is how I'm going to end this. And so it's set up the whole way through to work that way. And I really love doing that. I really find it enriching to my writing. And even when I do have a marriage with a happily ever after, I kind of like to put a little bit of a twist in there anyway. So if I can. So
No, but that's honestly amazing. I think you can be different, and you can find your own niche by different ways, and you can have your own writing style and stuff. But you can also have this kind of thing that will attract your kind of readers to you. So, for example, your unconventionally happily ever afters could be your kind of a branding criteria. So you would just know that you are for the readers who are for more realistic, unconventional endings, but which are still satisfying and still will make you feel good.
yeah, and I wouldn't be happy if I tried. Like I remember when I was writing Duchess, I did have a couple of moments of really intense fear. What are people going to think at this ending? And I thought, if I don't do this, I will be really unhappy with myself. And I know some people haven't liked it, and I know people have absolutely adored it. And so if if the endings or the story or any part of what you're writing feels like you're doing it to tick a box, I don't quite know how you can sustain yourself. So I think if you have that pull to do things in a certain way, or to follow an idea or a creative thread down a rabbit hole and to see where it goes, I I do believe that that's an important thing to do, because eventually you will have a body of work that reflects you. And that's something I'm finding now, where I've sort of got a few works out there now that people can identify a style and a rhythm and an experience. And if I had tried to fit what I was doing into a different box, I would have a different body of work that they would be relating to, and it would possibly be a less authentic to myself body of work. And that's something which is something I am now really valuing about the choices that I made over the past few years to take those endings in the direction I did, or write the working class characters, or the I Will Steal You the Stars, which is the last story that I released. It's pretty hardcore in the slums and the tenements and the quite dire poverty of London, but it's still a beautiful love story. And if I shied away from those stories, I don't think I'd be happy. I don't think I would even be sitting here talking, because I wouldn't be writing. I would have moved on to another genre or another form of expression, because I just couldn't.
Yeah, I do think it's important to just to stay true to yourself, because you will find readers. There will be people who hate it for sure. Whatever you write, there will be people who hate it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
there will be people who love it as well. And when people find something that they can relate to, something unusual, something that I don't see everywhere, you're gonna get yourself like very loyal fans that will read anything you write. Yeah, and that's
So,
amazing. Well, I'm one of them now. I had this habit of reading, like binge reading authors, like just taking an author and like reading everything they write. The only thing is now I unfortunately have so many obligations that I don't have time to
yes.
do that. But I do try to sneak in like my favorites in between other reads. So yeah, now I think I have three more of your books on my Kindle. So
Oh,
yeah, they're gonna pop up very soon. Especially that some of them are short, and I can just
yeah.
like, I think with my fake mistress, it took me out of a slump, because I was reading something that was really not my thing at all, and I found myself like just forcing myself to read. And then I was like, why am I doing that? I'm just gonna pick something else. And then I'm like, oh, I have this story that's very short. Maybe like if I just start few pages, and like maybe if it hooks me, then great. If not, I can just put it down. I think I read it in like 1.5 days, just because I was traveling and I didn't have that much time. But I was like obsessed. I have to continue. What's happening? I have to continue this. And from here, after 40 minutes of interrogating you on everything else, I'll finally ask you about the writing part. Yeah, because I really, really enjoy your writing style. And I found myself wondering a lot, does it actually look like that in the first draft? Like how does your first draft look like? How bad is it? Like we all know it's bad, right? But like
Terrible.
how bad?
Terrible.
In which sense
Absolutely
terrible?
terrible. I discovery write, so I definitely just I will do a lot of handwriting and free writing. I often will have, I'll be thinking the next book ahead, the next project. So I will have a whole heap of scrawled notes. I use Scrivener for my first drafts. And so if I'm writing something and I get an idea of something a character might say, sometimes it's only a sentence, and I will pull up a Scrivener page for that book and make some notes and those types of things. And so I will kind of go through, write some things, maybe do some dot points. Something interesting happens here is something I write a lot in caps lock, and at other times I will just, and that's something I might write 1,000 words of that scene, and I don't even know where it's going to go. And quite often that will have very few words changed. So there is often these sparks of very clear understanding of what it is that is going to happen in the story. And then there are these other bits where I really don't know. And I will write those sorts of bits, and then I might go back and do some plotting, and then I'll write some more. I might do some research. So it's a very iterative process between all the stages. So I will be filling in my plotting sheets on the fourth and fifth drafts, still trying to figure out. Like I've been moaning to all my friends for at least a month that I don't know what happens in chapter 19. I really don't. Can someone help me? Like, no one could help me. And then I figured it out. I finally figured it out. And that's a long way in. So that's with, the first half a dozen chapters of the book I'm writing now are pretty much like they're off with the editor. And other chapters I'm sort of working and pulling together. So they are messy. They are very messy, my stories. Until the very end, they are still messy.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, a discovery writing. I'm not a discovery writer, but I heard from a lot of discovery writers that it is like that. It is the case.
Yeah.
So things are a bit chaotic, and you can plot, but you do still eventually plot, even if it's not in the
Yeah.
beginning. You
Yeah.
just make sure that it makes sense, that the pacing's good and whatever. Just on the line
Yeah, I
level.
will. I will still do a lot of plotting,
Mhm.
so it's just not first up.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard that that's a totally legit technique. It's just that maybe it will require a little bit more changing and moving around things because you didn't write it like that from the
yeah,
beginning. But then it's all. I mean, if you're willing to like put in all that work, that's totally. For me, it's I might try to do it like that, but the thing is, like I write not that much every day, so if I do it like that, I will write one book in 5 years. So I have to optimize myself.
you get better as like I know you're from watching you on Instagram and listening to some of the podcasts. I know you're on your first book, but you get better, and everybody says this, but you don't realize it until you actually do it and you actually say, I'm getting better. And so your first book is a little bit of a slow and lumbering thing, but then the second time it's a little bit easier, and then it's easier again. And I think the thing that you learn is that you know you can do it. Whereas the first time you're writing, you don't know you can do it. And that makes it hard. But the next book you write, you'll know you can write a book because you've already done it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that will be the case.
You will. You will. We'll
Um,
make sure
just
you will.
oh yeah, I'm trying to like put accountability wherever I can. I'm like doing reports and stuff. Like nobody wants to see that, but like if it's there and it's
Yep.
written there, that means I'm like at least I promised someone. So okay, I
Yep.
gotta do it now. Yeah. So for me, for example, I think the hardest thing, like I like plotting, I like thinking about things that will happen. I don't really have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with line by line writing. I have a huge imposter syndrome when I look at other people's writing and I'm like, oh my God, I understand everything. It's so beautiful. It doesn't seem very hard, but when I write myself, it doesn't come out that way. Like it comes out like very
No.
direct and simple and whatever.
Yep.
So what like let's talk about your line by line writing. Like how much editing do you do on the actual sentences?
A lot, a lot. So I just write whatever word comes to mind. So I use Pro Writing Aid for overused words. It changes every manuscript. So I think I've nailed down all my was's, and now the problem's my justs. I've got too many justs. Last last book it was so every sentence, not every sentence, but it felt like every sentence. So it does come out very, very messy when I write. Some bits will be really lovely and beautiful, but for the most part, it's not. And it's the finessing over and over. So I do a lot of printouts, and then I will hand edit, and I will also have thesaurus.com open. I'll if I've used the same word in a paragraph or on a page, I'll circle those and know I have to change at least one. My tip with that is if you find two words closest together, change the first one, not the second one. I don't know why, it just seems to work better. That might be just me, but I can usually come up with a better word for the first one. I don't know why. So it is a very slow process over and over, but they're all different. I feel like they're different thinking, different processes. So when you're creating a story, you're thinking about big picture and the plot and all of those types of things. You can't be thinking even choreography. Like when I was revising a song on a snowflake, I found that he took his shirt off twice, and it was just about to go to copy edit. It was really right at the end. It's like, oh my goodness, he's taken off two shirts. And even today, he put his umbrella away twice. You go, oh, that's not supposed to be there. And so it is that sort of different, just trusting that a different stage is for a different purpose. So if you sort of feel like now you're not writing like you look at your sentences, they're probably not as bad as you think they are, because we all look at our sentences and think, what on earth? And then you come back a bit later or someone else looks at it and says, it's really good. But also know that there are later stages for the finessing. It's not brain surgery. It doesn't have to be right first time. So that's where, with those sort of line edits and how those things look, I do have very, very close interrogation of my sentences, but not in the first, second, or third. It's all about checking who's where in the room and does the story make sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, just in terms of, I find that when I read your sentences, they like you use very beautiful descriptions and metaphors and stuff like that, and it doesn't seem too overwritten. It seems like it flows. Like I can read the sentence and it's going to be very beautiful, and it's not going to take like a whole paragraph, because sometimes that happens as well. And so these
On the
kinds of things that
first
they
on the first draft, they are a whole paragraph.
okay, so you have to narrow them down to still be beautiful, but somehow say it in a short. Oh, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. I think for me it's going to be the other way around. I write a very simple straightforward sentence, and I'm going to be like, how to say that in a more beautiful way, like just like not this like right in your face. Okay. All right, so in that case, you are writing the first draft, then you edit yourself, then at some point you also try to plot it. And so at which point do you give it out to the editor, and what kind of editing you do? Do you do developmental, line copy?
So I tend to do my own developmental edits. I have used developmental editors in the past, but at the moment I'm doing them. I break down the story into a table which has the word count of the chapter, whose point of view. I like to have chapters swap point of view. I don't care when I'm reading if chapters don't do that. It's my own hang up. So I can sort of see who's got how much time on the page, a summary of what happens in that chapter, and then I'll also have the beats. So what is the what beat in the romance am I hitting in that chapter, if any, because it isn't a match one beat, one chapter. So sometimes a chapter will have 4 or 5 things happening in it, and sometimes it will be an extension of the ones before. And so I do a lot of that myself as I'm going, which is often still plotting because I'm still trying to figure out what the hell happens in chapter 19. And then it will get to a point where I'll either be crazy and I need someone to look at it and give me a sanity check, or it's ready to go for some beta reads for some friends to read. And then I get that back, and then I do a printout at that stage, and I write their comments on the printout. I don't work from their feedback to me. I write everything they've given me onto it, but it kind of compresses, and you start to see patterns of people who said this didn't work. So when one person says something didn't work, it might be, maybe I should fix that. But when two or three say something doesn't work, okay, I've got a problem. And so then I will do another read through and make all my markups and then another draft. So it's not a fully rewritten draft by that stage. I resave the file and then make notes against that, or like make the changes within that document.
Okay.
And then it goes for a copy edit.
Mm-hmm. And so you use your friends as beta readers, as I understood.
Yeah. Other historical romance writers that I've met.
Okay.
And we trade off. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that's a great technique. I would love to do that. I don't have other romance writer friends here close to me that I can do that with, but eventually I hope to find some.
Mine are in America and
Okay.
the UK and Canada. So yeah, where it's the sort of community that I found through online. So we trade
Online,
off
yeah.
across the world.
I found that joining Instagram actually, I mean, not Instagram, the Bookstagram actually has done immensely well for me. Like I found so many people, writers and readers and everything. So this whole process from the first draft until it's published, how much time does it take you?
Cool. It depends, and we haven't talked about health yet, which is not a bad thing, but it definitely depends. It definitely depends based on my health. And so this year's been kind of a different year because I've written two stories kind of together. And so I've been writing the third book in my series, and then I also wrote a novella, and they're connected in that the couple in the novella become the parents of the female main character in the book, and they're part of the series. So they live on Honeysuckle Street with their many, many children. And so I wrote those two going back and forth between them across the year. So I started in late March, I think it was, when I started work on one of those, and then released one in September, and then we'll release the next one in November. So that's 6 or 7 months. Because they are shorter, they're a different process. It's not easy to write short, but it is a different process. So each one is probably about 6 months. I need rest time. It wouldn't matter if I was working on 1 or 10. They need a rest for me to go away and come back to. And so I found it really useful this year to be able to have a break from one story and then work on the other one. And when I came back to it, I found I was much more prepared and ready to tackle the problems. I don't know if I would ever do it again. I think it worked because the two stories are so connected. Like I really needed to know where Rosanna had come from, and to do that, I had to write her parents. So I won't be rushing to do that next year.
Well, yeah, you did mention that we haven't actually talked of any content that we warned people about. Uh, well, I mean, we got so caught up with the writing and the characters and everything.
Yeah.
But now, yeah, I think that's also a question I asked almost everybody, and that's basically the routine. So, how often do you write? What is like your process day to day, and how does your health affect, or how do you adapt yourself?
Yeah. So I have two chronic health conditions. I have a blood sugar disorder, and I have no thyroid because I had thyroid cancer. They took it away. That's how they fix it. So it's I had a really slow recovery. So I find that a lot of women who have thyroid problems who don't recover quickly keep it very, very quiet. So I'm well enough. I still have massive fatigue, and I think that's just what things are like. I get a lot of stretches of insomnia where I might wake up for 2 or 3 nights in a row and just be awake for hours. And so on those mornings, I just sleep. I used to set alarms before I got unwell, and so I would get up and work because I do my best work in the morning. But now I just sleep. If I need to rest, then I do. And so I will, but on the days, which is in most days, I will have 2 or 3 bad nights a week. And so on most of the other days, I get up early. And some days that might be 4 a.m. if I've had a solid 6 or 7 hours. And I just know within myself that I am awake and alert and ready to go. Usually it's 5 or 6 though, and I'll sit up and do a couple of hours, and then I go to work and get my kids off to school. And then in the evenings, again, depending on how I'm feeling, I'll do some more writing or reading or whatever stage I'm at. I do try and put some words down every day, but I don't force myself to do that. I enjoy doing it so much. I never have had to force myself to do that. And the other thing that I do a lot, because I have to manage those health conditions, is from time to time I'll take a day's leave, and I'll give myself a day to be calm and be the writer who, has the coffee and stays in her pajamas until lunchtime, and it's so much fun. And so I did that yesterday, actually. It was amazing. And so I give myself those days as well where I can catch up and have those sort of peak hours in the middle of the day, and weekends. I get a lot done on weekends. So that's sort of how I've had to balance off all of those sort of things that are going on, because I do need to work. I have bills to pay. So, and I also really love my job. I'm not in a rush to leave it for a full-time writing life. I quite like the balance between the two. But it is something where I found it very, very hard and very frustrating at the start, because I just couldn't do things the way I did before. And so when I was starting publishing those short stories, and I was so excited and getting a little bit of momentum. And then it was a couple of days after Hide and Seek was released that I wound up in emergency. And so it sort of snowballed very quickly to losing that energy and pace that I had. But by the same token, it was when I was in emergency and I was sort of lying there. You're sort of at the stage where they're not going to send you home, but they're not, that you're fine, but you've got to stay. You sort of know that you're not in imminent danger. And so I was lying in emergency and just thinking about books and writing and listening to the infomercials on the television. And that's when I came up with the idea for Honeysuckle Street. I was thinking about, I would really like to challenge myself to write a big book. And so it's kind of a strange sort of process that I've had, because so much of the creativity has come out of those moments of challenge. And it's sort of a strange thing. It's not something I'd ever thought of, but it's something I can't separate them out now. So I have to plan my stories, my releases, my marketing around how I think I might be health-wise, because otherwise I will burn out, and or I will find myself crunching to a deadline, which I have had. And it's not something that I'm particularly sad about, but it is just a reality that I do have to face. And that means that sometimes I am a little bit slower, or maybe I don't social media for a week, or it's only a couple of posts. And, and that's kind of something that I just have to deal with, and accept that I am a little bit slower. I'm a bit of a tortoise.
Well, what I'm hearing is basically you kind of were forced to learn to listen to yourself, right? To just
Yeah,
be
yeah,
kind to yourself. And that's, I mean, the reason for it is, of course, something that is not good, but eventually you found a way to make maybe for people who don't have chronic conditions, it's sometimes also useful to think that you should be kind to yourself. You shouldn't like just
yes,
work yourself to death just because you are like, I'm healthy, I'm fine, and then you're not fine at some point because you are running and you are just working yourself to a horrible state. So just having healthy understanding of how you're feeling and listening to yourself. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, for sure. And also making sure you find the fun, and you can drop things and they will still be there. You can pick them up. So if you need a little break, that's okay. The words will be there, social media will be there, and if what you need is that rest, you'll come back to it better.
that's right. You mentioned a deadline, and I started thinking, how would it be different if you were, for example, a traditionally published author? So, have you ever thought about like querying, having like a agent publisher? Would you want to do that?
I have sent like historical fiction out, and nobody's interested. That's okay. I actually really, really love being indie and self publishing. I really like the pace and the control. And I also I'm published wide now, so I did start out in Kindle Unlimited, but it was because of health. I thought I would be better off publishing wide, and I really enjoy being a wide author and having the different channels and that kind of process of being in different stores and being in libraries. So I I'm not particularly hungry to be traditionally published. If it's something that happens, then I would probably do it out of curiosity because I'm an intensely curious person, but I don't feel like I need that kind of aspect in what I do. I quite like just putting something up and seeing what happens with it. So,
Yeah, I've heard that from many authors, many different reasons, but yeah, indie publishing just gives you more control and gives you, as you said, more time to probably take care of yourself and adapt to your own schedule and to your health and stuff like this. But yeah, it would always be interesting to see if the
yes.
traditional way works out. So that'd be nice. Okay, so I think I also wanted to ask you about your community. So you have writer friends, and you met someone here on Instagram. And who would be your writer friends, and who would be your writer heroes?
So, my lovely friend Louise Mabry, who puts up with all my random DMs and reads my crappy drafts and all those types of things. So is one of the sort of closest friends. I've made many friends. Like if I started listing them, it would be 20 to 30 people. Where historical romance is a really lovely community. It's a small community. There's not a lot of difference between who publishes what and how. And it's been sort of a lot of fun to discover that. It wasn't something I expected in terms of who you can reach out to ask a question. There's not a whole lot of gatekeeping. But yeah, Louise is sort of the person that I message the most. And because she writes a historical romance in a similar vein to mine, where some of it is very questioning of the class system and wealth and privilege and all of those types of things. So that was how we came to know each other. We'd basically been reading each other's works and fangirling over each other. And then yeah, I forget who messaged who first, and then we started just sort of chatting a bit about the challenge of trying to write those sort of slightly different stories. And it's very reaffirming to find someone who's trying to do a similar thing. So everybody I know is very, very special though, but she's definitely the person I chat and spend the most time and Zoom with the most. And heroes, you asked heroes. So my favorite author, here she is, just because it's so beautiful. So this is Kate Forsyth, who's an Australian author, and she writes historical fiction, but she writes really beautiful sentences, really beautiful descriptions. And I've done some online courses with her. She's an incredibly generous teacher. You know, the 1 hour course goes for 2.5 because she makes sure everyone has their questions answered. And all of her historical fiction has happy endings, and they all have a little bit of romance in them. And when I was starting to write, I would look at her sentences because I found them so evocative and so beautiful. And I would break down her paragraphs to see what she had done. And so I would pull out a section and say, okay, in this sentence, she's describing the view out there. And in the next sentence, it's the feel of the breeze or the touch of something. And then you can hear something. And so I started to engage with her work in a different way once I started trying to figure out how I would do my own descriptions. And there's other writers I've done that to as well. I'll also do full book breakdowns and chapter summaries, like a structural edit, like I do for my own. If there's a book I find particularly captivating, or even a book of a length, and I'm trying to learn how to write that length, I will do that. But she's the one that pulling her apart and figuring out how her stories work hasn't changed the love of those stories. There's still a magic to how she writes. So in terms of guru, she's definitely up there for one of mine.
So you told me about your favorite author, and I started telling you that what I want to do is actually work with your descriptions in the same way. So I really love the way you describe things and emotions and settings. And I find myself like I'm reading and I want to like just stop and like study how you did that, but I'm also like, but no, I need to like continue reading because I want to know what happens. I need to finish this book, so maybe it's going to be like a second pass, especially I think over My Fake Mistress. It's a short one and it's going to be like super packed with all the stuff that I want to study, so that's what I'm going to do.
It's something I still do. And there's a book which, you know, pops up on Instagram from time to time called The Familiars. And that was a book I read in a day. And then I read it the next day because I was just trying to figure out what she did. It was just, yeah, in terms of setup and payoff, like what she set up in the first part of the book and then brought that to the end. It was an amazing lesson in how to plant those seeds early and then give that sort of, you know, bam at the end. So yeah, so it's something I don't think I'll ever stop doing.
Oh, you mentioned the library, and I just had a tiny little question. So, since you went wide, now you're not only on Amazon, right? You're like everywhere else. And
Yep.
how did you get
Yep.
your books into the libraries, actually?
So through publishing, there's two platforms that will distribute to libraries. So that's Kobo and Draft to Digital, and so that gives you access to something called Overdrive, and Overdrive then distributes to all sorts of library systems. So depending on where you are and what you can access through your library system will depend which one. So most of my books are on Hoopla. Some of them aren't. There are some library systems that request to not be sent erotica. So some of my stories are, some of them aren't. Most of them are though. Yeah, so that's pretty much how it's done. And there's no, you only do one. Don't do both. Don't do Draft to Digital and Kobo. But it's really easy. It's just press a button, yes, distribute to libraries, and work out a price, and then it's away. So it has to be requested, depending on the services. So a patron can go to their library and say, "Can you buy this ebook in for me, or a print book in
Hmm.
for me?" Or they can request it through Hoopla, and then if the library agrees, it's there.
Oh, so you had people do that, right? Like go
Yeah,
and
yeah,
request your books.
yeah,
Amazing. Okay.
yeah.
Do you have to give a warning that it's erotica or something?
When like selecting categories as part of general, which is the same on every platform, you'll pick the categories, which tells the distributor where they need to put your book in the store. And so that's kind of where they say yes or no. So like the portrait sitting isn't available in libraries, because it is marked as erotica,
Hmm.
but some of the others are. So I don't know. I try to be honest with all that stuff, though. I sort of think, well, if it is, that's where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
Yeah, that's totally okay. I'm just wondering about the technicalities of these things, like if you have to do it, because in Amazon it's a little bit also like tricky where you put how you categorize your book and where it can end up and how it can be hidden because it's erotica or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But those readers know how to find your books. So if that is what you are writing, like it does reduce your visibility, absolutely. But if it is what you are writing, they will still find you.
Yeah, you kind of need to be active, I guess, online
Yeah.
and try to find people like that. All right, so I always ask authors somewhere by the end about the writing advice, and so it can be the worst writing advice or the best writing advice, whichever like resonates with you that you would like to share.
So the best piece of writing advice, which I have written in thick black texter, and stuck up above my computer screens, and it comes from my friend Tony Park, who's an author. Hi, Tony, if you're watching. And it is trust the process. So that's what he always says over and over: trust the process, which is kind of another way of saying trust yourself. And so that's about, like you were saying about agonizing over the sentence. But the process is that you fix that later. So when you do want to agonize and beat yourself up, or let the imposter bunnies whisper in your ear, then then you just have to trust that you will catch it and you will fix it and you will make it beautiful and perfect when you send it out into the world. And so that's the best piece of writing advice that I have ever heard. And every single day I sit down at my desk and remind myself that I do need to just trust the process, and I know I can do it because I've already done it. So yeah,
It's given to people so that they can sort of relax in the moment and not to think
yeah,
too much about all the things that they need to do. And when I'm writing, I do that. I'm like, okay, this is like for future me to fix. But then
yeah.
I'm like, the future me is gonna is gonna be so in trouble with all those things because when it comes time to edit, it's also this like you imagine it as this huge thing because you wrote such a like a messy draft and who's gonna fix it now? You have to fix it, and it's just yeah, it does sound a little intimidating, not a little, a lot intimidating. But yeah, I
It
guess.
also it also depends what you enjoy. See, I really love that part of the process. Like I don't know how I write anything because I hate first drafts. I really hate them. Like I just spend the whole time moaning that I don't know what's happening, which is because I don't plot, and so I've got no one to blame but myself. But I really love editing. So in terms of the process, it's not as terrible as it seems. And you can break it down. You don't have to do it in one go.
Yeah, yeah, I think when it comes to editing, it doesn't have to be that scary because there is a lot of writing advice that comes to editing, and then you can apply that and it will feel a little bit better. I find I find editing my whole I do have a first draft that I finished, but I'm not
Yeah.
like working on it currently. I'm not editing. But the Friday kiss that we both do, right? Like every
Yes.
Friday, I find just picking little pieces out of my draft and editing those, just those little
Mm.
pieces, is like, well, okay, I can do that. That works. So then maybe the whole thing will work if I can do it in these little
Yeah.
snippets. So yeah, just
I
things like
do
that.
that. Yeah. So I do edit from the Friday Kiss as well because it's not, I don't very often pull from something I've already published unless I have nothing. And the other thing I do is in my newsletter every month, I have a little sort of bit of historical interest, so something that I've come across in my research. I have a little bit of a story about that historical thing I've found, and then I have about 500 words from my work in progress that I put in to show how that research is forming part of the story as I'm writing it, and so then I edit that as I'm going. And so when I come back and I'm doing the big read through and I come to one of those bits that I've already edited, it's like, oh, nice. I don't have to do I don't have to do very much for a couple of days. So there is a lot to be said for that in process editing and sharing of your work in small pieces, because it does give you that feedback and confidence that maybe you can do 60, 70, 80,000 words when it comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of confidence as well. Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't have any books out. I don't have anything, but I have friends who know my characters' names and they know their personalities a little already. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that is so bizarre, but that's amazing. And your idea with the newsletter, I really love it. I'm gonna go subscribe after this because just showing people, I really love behind the scenes, how things are written, how things happen. I'm one of those people who always read like author's notes after they read the book.
Oh, I love you.
I always find something interesting in there, and sometimes these things even change my opinion of the book. Like if I don't like something, and then I read an author's note, I'm like, ah, okay, that's why that was there,
Mm.
and that's what happened. And I'm like, it even changes my whole view.
Yeah.
Okay, so almost the last question. I'm gonna let you go soon. Just if you are reading any craft books to improve your craft, if you're listening to any podcasts, watching any YouTube channels, could you recommend something to anyone who's listening?
My favorite craft book is it's KM Whelan's Character Arcs. So she has an
Okay.
amazing blog. So you've
Yes.
possibly come across her. So she was one of the first craft books when I first started writing a long time ago that I came across in terms of plotting and planning. There's a podcast that I always recommend, which is called The Invisible College, that the BBC put together years ago. They're short 10 minutes. It's a set series of, I think, about 10 podcasts, and they went into the archives of BBC Radio and pulled out all these old interviews with mostly authors who had passed away, which is why it's the Invisible College, and it's extraordinary. So there's an excerpt of, I think it's Virginia Woolf, talking about when Henry James used to come for tea and what that was like, and I just, even though it's very literary in terms of what they're talking about, like in terms of being literary authors, like Angela Carter, and they have the same kind of struggles about people responding to their work or not knowing what to do. And it's a beautiful podcast.
Invisible College, I've never heard about. I'm gonna check it out for sure because it sounds amazing. Kim Wyland, actually, I really, really love her podcast.
Yeah.
I don't read the blog because it needs me sitting down and actually reading something, but listening to a podcast is amazing. I think she was the first podcast that I've discovered about writing, and I
Mm.
started listening from the very beginning when she was doing like
Oh,
three
wow.
5 minute like little tiny episodes about maybe one little like aspect of writing that you can do,
Yeah.
and they were super nice because 3 5 minutes holds my attention perfectly. Like I don't snooze out while I'm listening. So and I haven't listened to the whole thing, but I really really love like how she developed it and all. Like I haven't read the books, but I'm planning to. And she has now a whole series on the story structure, explaining every plot point, every
Yeah.
aspect of the story structure. And now they are longer episodes, but they're still like very scripted, very good. Yeah, definitely, definitely recommend. That's amazing. All right. So before I let you go, I want to let my listeners know where to find you. What are your socials, website? Where can we read your books as well?
Yeah, so I'm in all stores and including my own store, which was very exciting. So I have my own Shopify store, which is aliviafleurbooks.com. And my newsletter, you can subscribe to my newsletter there. And I'm on mostly on Instagram and on Facebook, and that's enough for me. So
No TikTok for
and
you?
yeah, I tried, and I think you have to really be part of a community to try and hop in and market in a community like that. And I would like to try again on TikTok, but at the time when I was trying, it was just not a time for me to be TikToking.
Okay. Yeah, I find it honestly, I don't really find it even like community based there. I'm not a fan of TikTok. I'm there just because I try to find new people. On Instagram, I only apparently advertise to people that are my followers, and only those. I don't reach anybody else apparently. But on TikTok, you can just reach anybody potentially.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
why I'm there. Yeah, that's the only reason I'm there. But I don't really. I do like very low effort, like just the same thing I post everywhere. I post on TikTok because why
yeah.
not? But yeah, otherwise I also don't like that. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if any listener know that, but like if you want to support your favorite author, or just support indie authors in general, find their own shops. I mean, it's good to buy on Amazon because it's easy, but if they have a shop and you like don't mind, and if the price is the same or slightly bigger, I'm not sure, but just try to buy from the author's shop because it gives them the most royalties and. Eventually the
Ebooks,
I
yeah. Ebooks will
yes.
be the same price. Like that's the terms of service, that they have to be the same price on every store.
Yeah,
So
amazing then. And then actually I think it's even better to buy from an author's shop because from what I know, I have a giant library of ebooks on Kindle, but I'm thinking if I lose my like my Amazon account, if they decide that I ruined some like broke some rule, some terms of service or whatever, they take away my account and I'm losing all my books because they actually don't belong to me. I don't have them physically on like or I cannot get to them physically on my device. And I guess when you buy from like an independent shop, somehow you I'm not sure, will you have the EPUB, like the file itself?
yeah, so it gets sent via book funnel. So the same way that many authors send out arcs. I use book funnel, and so it just gets sent. So, but there would be a record. So if something happened to your device and you lost access, then the author would be able to look up and see that you had purchased and send a new copy or what have you. So.
Yeah.
But it is nice to buy from authors. So, and we do get a little bit more for
Yeah.
sales in our own store.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to get things through BookFunnel as well. Just because I know BookFunnel is not going to just cancel my account for no reason. And it's very hard to argue with Amazon when they decide that you did something wrong. And even though I think people have no say in that process at all, it's all AI by now, I'm pretty sure. And when you try to reach someone who is a person, they just don't care. And so, yeah, I'm bitter because I lost my right to review.
Me too. Me too. So, and
Hello.
I don't review. I was trying to. I had purchased a book, and I was just trying to leave it a star rating. And I don't know what happened, but whatever it was, I think it was maybe the bad internet where I am, and that kind of set off the yeah. So
I don't know. In my case, it was I got a couple of warnings about my reviews a couple of times because maybe my wording was not like entirely clean for them, and I fixed those. And then once I got a warning and I missed the email because Amazon sends an obscene amount of emails, and I just missed the one that was important, and so they like, so you're not replying. Well, you cannot review anymore. So yeah, all my reviews have been lost. I cannot do anything anymore, and like I'm really sorry to all the authors I agreed for because I cannot help them with Amazon,
yeah.
unfortunately. Well, anyway, that was me ranting. Sorry.
I feel you. I feel you because
Yeah,
yeah, I lost a lot of reviews that I had left just as a reader who loved a book, and
yeah.
they all would have been pulled, which I think is sad because that wasn't even ARCs. That was just me buying a book, loving it, and letting people know.
Yeah, and some of those authors have very little reviews, so one being pulled is actually a big impact on them. So that's
Yeah,
not nice. Anyway, I will put all your information in the show notes. And thanks a lot for
that's
joining
right.
me
Thank you.
today. It was an amazing conversation. I've learned a lot. I think my listeners will learn a lot as well. I hope you got something out of it as well.
I did. I did. It was. It's just always lovely to talk writing
Yeah,
because yeah, it's just always fun.
yeah, that's why I do it basically. I pretend I want to help people, but I just want to ask people questions, especially when I like someone's writing. I'm like, oh, I can get them on my podcast and then interrogate them about everything I need to know about their writing.
So much, and thank you to everybody listening.
Thank you guys. Have a nice day, evening, morning, night, whatever you're having, where you are. Bye. If you like what you hear so far, please consider subscribing and tune in for the next episode. If you have burning questions about writing you'd like to have answered, head to my Instagram page at kkalbabooks and leave me a message. Or use my email k.k.alba.books@gmail.com. If you'd like your favorite author to answer your question on my show, again, head to my Instagram or email me to let me know which author you'd like me to invite, and I'll try to get over my anxiety and do it. On the other hand, if you're an author who's published at least one book, traditional or indie, and you'd like to become a guest, well, you know what to do by now. Message me and let's get to know each other.